The day Ifeoma's marriage died wasn't when Ezi first called her fat, or when he started sneaking late-night calls. It was the moment she realized she'd been apologizing for taking up space in her own home. In the heart of Oi, where tradition danced with modernity, Ifeoma stood at the precipice of her new life, clutching her university diploma with trembling hands. She was everything a young Nigerian woman could aspire to be: beautiful, educated, and full of dreams that stretched beyond the horizon. Little did she know that fate had already begun weaving the intricate tapestry of her destiny, one that would test the very foundations of love, family, and self-worth. The day she met Ezi was painted in the warm hues of a setting sun. He cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, the kind of man whose presence commanded attention in any room. Their eyes met across the bustling restaurant, and time seemed to pause, holding its breath for what would unfold. It was the kind of love that poets wrote about: instant, electric, and seemingly destined. Ezi pursued Ifeoma with the same determination that had made him a successful businessman. Every gesture was grand, every moment carefully orchestrated to sweep her off her feet. He showered her with gifts that made her friends gasp in envy. Designer handbags appeared at her doorstep, and impromptu weekend getaways became their norm. "My queen deserves nothing but the best," he would say, his dark eyes twinkling with pride as he watched her unwrap yet another present. Their wedding was the talk of the town for months. Madame Uno, Ifeoma's mother, beamed with pride as she watched her daughter float down the aisle in a dress that cost more than some people's yearly salary. Mazioki, her father, fought back tears as he gave his beloved daughter's hand in marriage, his heart full of hope for her future. The celebration lasted 3 days, with guests whispering about how perfect they were together, the successful businessman and his beautiful bride. In those early days of marriage, their home was filled with laughter and dreams. Ezi would return from work bearing gifts, insisting that Ifeoma need not worry about finding a job just yet. "Let me spoil you," he'd say, pulling her close. "You deserve to rest after all those years of studying." Ifeoma would sink into his embrace, feeling like the most fortunate woman in the world. When the pregnancy test showed positive, their joy knew no bounds. Ezi lifted Ifeoma off her feet, spinning her around their marble-floored living room. "My son," he declared confidently, already certain of the child's gender. "Our little prince." The future stretched before them like an endless road paved with gold, and Ifeoma's heart swelled with love for both her unborn child and the man who had made all her dreams come true. But as the Nigerian sun rose and set, day after day, shadows began to creep into their perfect world, shadows that would test the strength of their love and reveal the true nature of the man Ifeoma had married. As Ifeoma's belly swelled with new life, her world began to shrink. The changes in her body, once celebrated as beautiful signs of impending motherhood, became weapons in the hands of the man who had promised to love her forever. Ezi's transformation was as subtle as it was cruel, like poison seeping slowly into pure water. It started with glances, quick, disapproving looks when she reached for second helpings at dinner. Then came the comments, carefully crafted to wound. "My mother," he would say, his voice dripping with false concern, "carried 8 children and never lost her figure." 8 children, Ifeoma. And look at you carrying just 1. The mirrors in their luxury home became Ifeoma's enemies. She would stand before them, turning sideways, watching as her once slender frame expanded week by week. The pregnancy cravings were relentless, striking at odd hours with an intensity that left her weak with need. Late at night, she would creep to the kitchen like a thief in her own home, eating quickly and silently, afraid of the disappointment she would see in her husband's eyes. But Ezi's cruel comments were just the beginning. His phone began to buzz at strange hours, and he would step onto the balcony to take calls in hushed tones. The scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to his clothes when he returned home late, his excuses about business meetings wearing thin as gossamer. "You know how it is," he would say, not quite meeting her eyes. "A man in my position has to maintain certain appearances." The threat of other women hung in the air like a storm cloud. "You should see how they look at me," he would boast, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Young, beautiful women who take care of themselves. They understand what it means to maintain standards." Each word was a dagger, expertly thrown to pierce Ifeoma's already fragile self-esteem. In the quiet moments between his barbs, Ifeoma would caress her growing belly and whisper apologies to her unborn child. She blamed herself for everything, for the weight gain, for her husband's wandering eye, for not being strong enough to resist the cravings that tormented her. The woman who had once walked with confidence through university halls now moved through her own home like a shadow, trying to make herself smaller, invisible. The warm, loving home they had built together transformed into a battlefield where every meal became a silent war, every pound gained another defeat. And still, Ifeoma held on to hope, telling herself that things would improve after the baby came. But deep in her heart, in the place where truth refuses to be silenced, she knew that something fundamental had shifted in her marriage, something that perhaps had been there all along, waiting like a serpent in paradise to show its true nature. The cry of a newborn son pierced the pristine halls of the hospital, but for Ifeoma, the joy of motherhood came wrapped in layers of anxiety. Her body, still soft and stretched from carrying life, felt foreign to her. The mirrors in her hospital room reflected a woman she barely recognized, her face fuller, her body changed by the miracle of birth. Breastfeeding brought its own challenges. The constant hunger that accompanied nursing her son felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of the very thing that had turned her husband's love to contempt. Ezzy's visits to the hospital were brief, his disappointment palpable, as he looked at her, as if expecting her to magically return to her pre-pregnancy form mere days after giving birth. Still eating like there's no tomorrow, he would sneer, watching her finish the hospital meals. I thought once the baby was out, you'd finally show some self-control. His words cut deeper than the cesarean scar that was still healing on her belly. The arrival of Madame for the traditional omuku should have been a blessing, a time for mother-daughter bonding and learning the art of caring for a newborn. Instead, it became the catalyst for an explosion that had been building for months. The older woman's experienced eyes missed nothing, not the way her daughter flinched at her husband's approach, nor the tears hastily wiped away when she thought no one was looking. It was a quiet afternoon when everything shattered. The baby was sleeping, and Ifeoma sat with her mother in the parlor, allowing herself a small moment of joy as they shared popcorn and stories. Ezzy's entrance changed the atmosphere instantly, like a cloud passing over the sun. "Can't you stop stuffing your face for 1 minute?" he spat, his handsome features twisted with disgust. "You're becoming an embarrassment." But this time, Madame Uno's presence changed the dynamic. She rose like a lioness defending her cub, her voice steady but charged with fury. "You dare speak to my daughter this way, after she has given you a son?" The confrontation escalated rapidly. When Ezzy raised his hand to strike Ifeoma, something snapped in Madame Uno. The ceramic artwork, a wedding gift that had witnessed their descent from love to hatred, found a new purpose in her hands. The sickening thud of its impact with Ezzy's head echoed through the room, followed by the heavy sound of his body hitting the floor. All time seemed to freeze. The wail of police sirens cut through the shocked silence, their blue lights painting surreal patterns on the walls of what had once been a home filled with love. As officers led a handcuffed Ezzy away, Ifeoma stood in the chaos, her sleeping son cradled against her chest, feeling strangely light, as if the weight she had been carrying wasn't just physical, but the burden of a love that had turned toxic. Freedom came with the slam of a door. Released from police custody on bail, Ezzy had stormed into their home like a thundercloud, his voice booming through the halls as he ordered Ifeoma, their infant son, and Madame Uno out of his house. The home that had once echoed with promises of forever now rang hollow with the sound of their hasty departure. Rain fell softly as they made their way to Mazioki's compound, nature's tears marking the end of what should have been a beautiful chapter in Ifeoma's life. But where one door closed, another opened wide. Mazioki stood in the doorway of his home, his arms spread wide in welcome, his face a canvas of unconditional love. "Adam," he called out, using the special name he had given her in childhood. "My first daughter, the strength of my youth, welcome back to where you have always belonged." His words wrapped around Ifeoma like a warm embrace, stronger than any marriage vow had proved to be. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising speed, as if Ezzy was desperate to erase all evidence of their shared past. The same hands that had once slipped a wedding ring onto her finger now signed divorce papers with casual indifference. When his family came to return the bride price, they carried it not with the solemnity such an occasion deserved, but with barely concealed relief, as if freeing their son from a burden. But it was the aftermath that truly revealed the depths of Ezzy's character. Before the ink had dried on their divorce papers, social media exploded with images of him and his new love interest, a woman whose figure matched his exacting standards. His sisters, ever loyal to their brother's cruelty, became digital town criers, broadcasting his new relationship with vicious enthusiasm. "Our real wife," they captioned photos of the new girlfriend. "The queen our brother deserves." Each post was a carefully aimed arrow, meant to pierce Ifeoma's heart. But their barbs found less purchase with each passing day. In the quiet of her father's compound, surrounded by the unconditional love of her family, Ifeoma began to see her marriage for what it had been, not a fairy tale, but a cautionary tale. As she watched her son grow, his innocent giggles filling the air that had once been thick with her tears, she realized that sometimes the end of a story could be more beautiful than its beginning. Yet in the depths of night, when the house grew quiet and memories crept in uninvited, Ifeoma would sometimes wonder if Azzy had ever truly loved her, or if she had simply been another acquisition in his carefully curated life, a possession to be discarded when it no longer met his specifications. Dawn painted the sky in shades of hope as Ifeoma and her father, Mazioki, set out on their daily walk. The morning air carried whispers of possibility, and with each step along the dirt paths of their village, Ifeoma felt the weight of her past growing lighter. These walks had begun as her father's gentle suggestion, but they had transformed into something sacred, a daily ritual of healing that went far beyond mere exercise. "You see that bird?" Adamma would say, pointing to a creature soaring overhead. "It doesn't question its right to fly. It simply spreads its wings." His wisdom, delivered in such simple metaphors, began to take root in Ifeoma's heart, replacing the poisonous words that had once lived there. The transformation wasn't just physical, though her body was indeed changing. Each morning after returning from their walks, Ifeoma would stand before her mirror not with the self-loathing of before, but with growing acceptance. She learned to nourish her body rather than punish it, replacing the frantic eating habits of her married life with mindful meals that celebrated both health and pleasure. Her father's business became another avenue for renewal. What started as simple bookkeeping evolved into full management as Ifeoma discovered a talent for commerce that had laid dormant during her marriage. The small textile shop flourished under her care, its success measured not just in naira but in the confidence that bloomed in her eyes. "Mama, look," her son would exclaim, toddling through the shop with fabric samples trailing behind him like colorful kites. His presence there became as natural as breathing, and customers soon grew accustomed to the sight of Ifeoma, conducting business with her child perched on her hip, his small hands playing with calculator buttons as she negotiated with suppliers. The weight began to fall away, not through the desperate measures she had once attempted, but as a natural consequence of her newfound peace. Her body, no longer a battlefield, responded to kindness and care in ways it had never responded to criticism and shame. The transformation wasn't just about returning to her former size, it was about discovering a strength she hadn't known she possessed. In quiet moments, when the shop was closed and her son slept peacefully, Ifeoma would sit in her father's garden, surrounded by the night-blooming jasmine he had planted for her mother years ago. She thought about the woman she had been, the one who had believed love meant accepting cruelty, and marveled at how far she had come. Her reflection in the shop windows no longer showed a victim, but a warrior who had learned to fight her battles not with fists or words, but with self-love and determination. Fate has a way of writing its own stories, of turning tables when least expected. For Azzy, that moment came on a rain-slicked highway, where his expensive car spun out of control and took with it not just his mobility, but the carefully constructed facade of his perfect life. The stroke that followed the accident left half his body paralyzed, his smooth speech reduced to labored words, and his commanding presence diminished to that of a man dependent on others for the simplest tasks. The girlfriend who had once preened for his sister's social media posts disappeared like morning mist under the harsh sun of reality. His sisters, who had once delighted in tormenting Ifeoma with pictures of his new life, found endless excuses why they couldn't take their brother in. "We have our own families," they said, "our own responsibilities." The same words they had once used to praise his rejection of Ifeoma now became their shield against his need. It was desperation that drove him back to Mazioki's compound, wheeled in by the last sister who still answered his calls. The sight that greeted him was a cruel mirror of what he had lost. Ifeoma stood in the doorway, more beautiful than he remembered, her body restored not by the cruel demands he had made, but by the gentle nurturing of self-love and family support. Ifeoma, he struggled to form the words, his once commanding voice now a shadow of itself. Please, marriage is for better or worse. Remember, you're the wife of my youth. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he gestured at his wheelchair. I need you now, more than ever. The laughter that burst from Ifeoma's lips was not cruel, but it held all the irony of the moment. Now you remember marriage is for better or worse. Her voice was strong, confident, the voice of a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes he had left her in. Where was this wisdom when I carried your child, when my body changed to give you a son? His sister shifted uncomfortably as Ifeoma continued, each word a reflection of their own past cruelty. What happened to all those beautiful young women you paraded around? The ones your sisters called real wife? She shook her head, not in anger but in pity. Go back to them. Surely they'll remember marriage is for better or worse. The gates of Mazioki's compound closed behind Eze's wheelchair with a finality that echoed through his bones. Within weeks, he found himself in a state home for the disabled, his room a far cry from the luxury he had once known. His sisters visited less and less, until their visits became as rare as rain in the desert. From his window in the home, Eze watched life continue without him, understanding too late that the beauty he had valued so highly was as fleeting as his own ability to walk, while the love he had discarded was the only thing that might have sustained him through his darkest hour. True love often arrives quietly, without the fanfare of first-sight attraction or the glitter of expensive gifts. For Ifeoma, it came in the form of Ben's gentle smile across a business meeting table. He had come to negotiate a bulk purchase for his chain of boutiques, but found himself captivated not by the textiles, but by the confident woman who discussed thread counts and profit margins while bouncing a toddler on her knee. Unlike the whirlwind that had been her first marriage, this romance unfurled slowly, like a flower reaching for the sun. Ben never rushed, never pushed, understanding that Ifeoma's heart had weathered storms and needed time to trust again. Their first dates were simple afternoon walks where he would listen to her son's excited babbling about everything and nothing, weekend picnics where he brought healthy snacks, showing without words that he had paid attention to her journey. You're beautiful, he would tell her, not just when she was dressed up for dinner, but in the ordinary moments when she was concentrating on business accounts, when she was cleaning ice cream from her son's face, when she was simply being herself. His love wasn't a spotlight that demanded performance, but a warm sunshine that encouraged growth. Most telling was his relationship with her son. Ben never tried to replace the boy's biological father, but created his own special bond. He would spend hours teaching the child to ride a bicycle, picking him up after every fall, celebrating every small victory. Look, Mama, her son would shout, pedaling wobbly circles in their compound, while Ben watched with the same pride as if the child were his own flesh and blood. Their wedding was different from her first, smaller, more intimate, but infinitely more joyous. When Mazioki gave his daughter away for the second time, his eyes held not just hope, but certainty. The celebration wasn't about impressing guests or displaying wealth, it was about two families becoming one, about love that had been tested by experience and emerged stronger. Meanwhile, in a state facility across town, Eze sat in his wheelchair by the window, watching families pass by on their way to visit other residents. His sister's visits had dwindled to occasional duty calls on major holidays. The girlfriend, who had once posed so proudly for social media, had long since blocked his number. In his loneliest moments, he would think of Ifeoma not the young bride he had tried to mold to his shallow ideals, but the strong woman who had emerged from his cruelty, the woman who had found happiness not in fitting someone else's standards, but in being truly, authentically herself. But Ifeoma rarely thought of Eze anymore. Her life was too full of real joy of a husband who loved her completely, a son who thrived in their happy home, and a sense of self that no one could ever again shake. She had learned that true love doesn't demand transformation, it provides the safe space where you can transform yourself.